want to be centered. No, I don't want to be centered.
Why don't you go center?
Okay. All right. You want to say intro? You can say intro. Wait, sorry. Give us 1 second.
Okay.
Hi, are we ready to start?
Yes.
Okay, so if you don't mind, we'll begin with our introduction.
Go.
Good afternoon, Texas. Once again, it's great to be connecting with you. My name is Ishan. I'm an executive member of the Davis Suzuki debate team. And today we're all here to discuss the tragic event that occurred on January 8th and whether Donald Trump, the United States president, is responsible for it. Just a quick summary of how things should go today. We'll begin with 2-minute speeches for 3 main topics, beginning with morals pro, followed by the con side. From there, we'll move on to our economics pro, again followed by the con. And then again, we'll move to the ethical debates, starting with the pros, followed by the cons. Now, right after the speeches are done, we'll continue onto our rebuttal period, like always. And that rebuttal period will last approximately 25-ish minutes. And we'll give a 5-minute warning when we have to go, just before. So that everyone's able to get 1 or 2 more points in before we all have to end it off and say our goodbyes. And after that, we'll do our formal conclusions and everything, the usual. Okay, so now I'll turn the mic over to our moral side to begin with the speeches.
When flight 752 went, sorry, an announcement's going.
Would all students please leave the form in the foyer and hallways? It's that time again, the buses are left. Please leave the
Sorry,
foyer and
there's just
hallways.
announcements.
Okay.
Okay. When Flight 752 went down, killing 176 people on board, it was considered a tragic accident that could have been avoided. The deadly mistake occurred during the heightened U.S. and Iran tensions after the United States killed Iranian General Qassem, which led to the moral blame to be placed with Donald Trump. Though some can argue Trump cannot be held responsible for Iran's actions, it cannot be ignored that he chose to escalate hostilities, contributing to the sequence of events ending with the plane being shot down. Trump ordered the attack on Qasem Soleimani when was not the only factor causing the escalation, but it is certainly what is bringing us on the brink of war. Trump had also withdrawn from the Iran nuclear deal and imposed sanctions, therefore causing Iran to possibly fear American airstrikes on its territory, potentially leading to the air defense errors. Furthermore, Trump had even gone so far to threaten the cultural sites of Iran. When the Iranian military finally released the truthful statement behind the 2 missile strikes on Flight 752, they claimed it a human error. The Iranian military had mistaken the airplane as a cruise missile, which are high-precision missiles used against terrestrial targets. That appeared to be flying in near proximity to a sensitive military site and was determined as a threat. Due to Donald Trump's actions, Iran was on a high alert for their safety and were also capable of using a weapon system in the area. This was the perfect equation for a disaster. If there were no threats available, these weapons would not have been activated. Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll be moving on to the con side for the moral argument. That's you guys.
Okay. The Islamic Republic of Iran is a government that came to power in 1979 illegally and then held American hostages for over 1 year, but held their country hostage for 40. Enough is enough. In the last gasping breath of his dying government, they blamed the others for their mistakes. The mistake they made began in 1979 when they overthrew the Shah. On Wednesday, the State Department's January 15, 2020, released a short Twitter feed extolling Iran's rich history of human rights from the time of Cyrus up until the 1979 revolution. However, experts on Iran say that it is glossing over some major problems, mainly the U.S. and British-backed reign of the Pahlavi dynasty, which before its ouster in 1979 was forged for political and economic development, but also well-documented political repression. The Trump administration's obsession with an ancient Persian emperor. We're all aware of the Islamic Republic's terrible human rights accord, said Holly Daggers, a non-resident Iran analyst with the Atlantic Council, a Washington-based think tank. But the Trump administration wants to demonize the Iranian government in every way possible, even if it means whitewashing the human rights record of the Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. So where were Iran's monarchs, and what's the once royal family up to now? The Pahlavi dynasty reigned over Iran from 1925 to 1979. Founding father Reza Shah Pahlavi was born Reza Khan and came from a humble background. He soon rose up the ranks from soldier to military leader to oust the ruler of the Qajar dynasty, which consolidated power in the late 1780s. Reza Shah held court until 1941, when a British and Russian invasion forced him to abdicate. His son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, took over. The younger Pahlavi wasn't as beloved or as confident a ruler as his father, but then the tides turned, at least for a little bit, in his favor. In 1953, the United States and Britain were confronted with a problem. Iranian nationalist and leader Mohammad Mossadegh was elected prime minister and was pushing to nationalize Iran's oil industry, in which the two Western powers were heavily invested. In the political upheaval, the Shah fled, so the CIA and M16, loath to lose access to Iran's markets, orchestrated a coup to oust Mossadegh and return the Shah. Iran's ruler was now back and determined to hold on to power. Pahlavi's reign had advantages for many Iranians, such as rapid economic growth, urban development, and a modernizing education system and social advancements for women. It also had its disadvantages, mainly political repression by the state, backed by the fear of its intelligence agency, Savak. Members of the political opposition were routinely jailed and tortured, among other abuses. Comparatively, Iran was in a much better place in the 1970s than it is today, said Roham Alvandi, an associate professor of international history at the London School of Economics and Political Science. At the time, there's a reason there was a popular revolution against the Shah. The monarchy was facing a crisis of legitimacy because of political repression of the Shah's regime. After months of revolutionary unrest, Pahlavi left Iran in January 1979. Soon after, it became the Islamic Republic of Iran. At the time, neither the Shah nor Iran's new leaders were interested in human rights, Alvandi said. Looking back on the 1970s from today, we tend to forget how out of fashion liberalism was in Iranian politics, he said. Neither the Shah nor the leftist or Islamist opponents believed in liberal democracy, but they understood the value of instrumentalizing human rights as No one in the Pahlavi family has returned to Iran since they left. A cancer-stricken Mohammad Reza Pahlavi died in 1980 and is buried in Egypt. He had 5 children, 1 daughter with his first wife, 4 children with his third wife, Farah, who lives in France. Alvandi said the family's financial status and sources are murky. They probably retained some money when they left Iran, but it's unclear how much, and their lifestyle doesn't appear overly lavish. 2 of the Shah's children died as adults, one reportedly from suicide, another from a drug overdose. The former crown prince, 59-year-old Reza Pahlavi, is based in Maryland. Farah Pahlavi is remembered fondly by some Iranians who saw her as a supporter of Iranian culture and arts and a moderating force within the isolated monarchy, Alvandi said. For similar reasons, she's also detested by some monarchists who blame her for her husband's decision to not crack down harder on revolutionary forces when she had the chance. The former queen occasionally takes part in flattering documentaries and interviews. When tensions with Iran and the United States rise, as they have in recent weeks, the surviving former crown prince starts making the rounds in Washington. In recent days, Reza Pahlavi has been speaking on Fox News and to the neoconservative Hudson Institute think tank, where he has expressed support for President Trump's maximum pressure approach to Iran and advocated for regime change. My compatriots understand that this regime cannot be reformed and must be removed, Agence France Presse reported him saying at the Hudson Institute on Wednesday. Many Iranians still resent the Pahlavis for the repressive and unequal rule, while others, particularly older ones in the diaspora, are angry at how Iran has developed and are nostalgic for the past, Agra said. Even though, she added, Iranians as a whole aren't waiting for the Pahlavi dynasty's return. When you lose everything and have to flee Iran and start over in a new country where you don't speak the language and understand the cultural norms, it is only natural for an Iranian to be angry and bitter about the outcome of the 1979 revolution and to have nostalgia for the past, she said. But that doesn't mean pre-1979 history should be whitewashed just because we don't like the clerics in Tehran and what they've done to Iran. One factor shaping the public opinion of the Pahlavis is whether Iran is Monodo, a satellite channel run by Iranian exiles in London. The station airs pro-Pahlavi shows and documentaries that portray only the positive parts of this history, such as the freedom of clubs and women wearing whatever they wanted. For those shown a rosy picture of the past with no mention of the human rights violations and poverty that played a role in the fomenting the 1979 revolution. It's only natural that these young Iranians will have certain leanings in favor of the past, Agra said. There's no accurate polling regarding the Pahlavi's family popularity in Iran today, but analysts said that despite the occasional chants in favor of the Shah at anti-government protests, The former crown prince has no political prospects with Iran. Reza Pahlavi matters in the context of the US, Alvandi said. I don't think he matters that much in the context of Iran. The political future of Iran is going to be decided in Iran. It's not going to be decided in California. In this speech today, we would like to remember that the moral authority to rule the Iranian people was stolen by radical Islamic rulers. For the past 40 years, they have held sway over the freedom-loving people of Iran. Now, maybe with the light of day beginning to shine out on all of the underhanded and illegal activities that this government has done to its people and others, the real moral question can be addressed. Is this a legal government that speaks for Iran? Is this a moral authority of Iran, or are the people going to rise up and take back the power that is in their hands? Thank you. Oh, that's all.
Hey, thank you so much. Yeah, we'll be now moving on to our economics argument. So for the pro side.
The U.S. has made efforts to constrict the Iranian economy as much as possible since all the way back to Obama's presidency. Sanctions were consistently being tightened on Iran to restrict their economy as much as possible. While eventually these sanctions began to ease up with the introduction of the nuclear deal, these efforts were immediately held in vain when Trump withdrew from the nuclear deal in 2018. This sparked a growth in tension between the countries and marked a significant beginning in Trump's own negative relationship with Iran. Since then, things have only continued to escalate. Trump's reintroduction to trade sanctions have proven to create problems for Iran's economy. The International Monetary Fund predicted that Iran's crude oil industry would see a significant decline as a result of restrictions on the sale of Iranian oil. Being their largest and most prominent sectors, Iran's declining oil and mining industries have adopted a heavy toll on the country's total economy, as the country's total trade with the world is consistently shrinking. With the recent news of aggression between both countries, Iran's economy could see even further economic struggles. Trump has already made it clear that he is bold enough to push sanctions and restrictions even further to achieve his goals, as seen in the US-China trade war, and it is very likely that he will continue to further place pressure on Iran's economy. The falling of the Ukrainian jet could pose even further economic threats for not just Iran, but even other countries as well. For example, Canada and the US have had a very close relationship, and Canada depends heavily on the American economy in order for it to thrive. With Trump enforcing economic turmoil for other countries like Iran, Canada may be put in a conflicting position once again like it was with the China-US trade war. In this current trade war, China has developed negative relations towards Canada as a result of their backing of US policies and refusing their demands. Canada, being America's little sister in a sense, is limited in action as it heavily depends on its relationship with the US, so that it simply can't turn its back on them. With Trudeau placing the blame on the downing of the jet on the US, this could create tensions for even the two of them as well, and could even have the potential to start seeing sanctions for Canada as well, considering Trump's track record.
Okay, you guys now have the floor to proceed with your economic speech.
The economic motivation for Iran to admit to their mistake can be seen in this blame shifting. Instead of directly admitting to the real cost of an illegal government trying to once again fool its people, Iran tried to blame President Trump. Yes, President Trump has his own problems, and we are not here to defend him against anything he may have done. What we are here for is to defend him against this. The reason why the media, Democrats, and Prime Minister Trudeau have joined in on this charade is another story. The best way to get out of trouble when you get caught at doing something is to shift the blame to someone else. And this is exactly what the Iranian government did on January 11th. On January 11, 2020, I quote, "A sad day, preliminary conclusion of internal investigations by armed forces. Human error at the time of crisis caused by U.S. adventurism led to disaster. Our profound regrets, apologies, and condolences to our people, to the families of all victims, and to other affected nations," end quote. This was accompanied by a military statement indicating that the plane was mistaken for a hostile target after it turned towards a sensitive military area. I quote again, "The military was at its highest level of readiness. In such a condition, because of human error and an unintentional way, the flight was hit," unquote. The country has said that they'll upgrade their systems to prevent such mistakes in the future, and that responsible parties would be referred to judicial department and be held accountable. On the one hand, on some level, I have to give Iran credit for admitting this, as there are plenty of governments that would have tried to cover something like this up, even if there was evidence making it very clear what happened. Not surprisingly, there are also some blame shifting here. They're emphasizing that crisis was caused as US adventurism and that led to disaster. Personally, I think the apology would have to come across as more sincere if they had left that out. Though at the same time, I don't think the cause and effect conclusion is completely off base. The US government shouldn't be blamed directly or indirectly for the accident. At the same time, I think it is also fairly likely that if the US hadn't escalated the situation with Iran, this probably wouldn't have happened. That's not to say that the US is at fault in any way, but I do think there's a cause and effect relationship of this. This revelation follows Iran claiming that the plane had a technical fault immediately followed the crash, in spite of no evidence pointing in that direction. We've seen international intelligence agencies suggest that the plane was shot down, and the video footage has even surfaced of an alleged incident. This has caused some airlines to already cancel flights to Tehran. This is an absolute terrible and heartbreaking tragedy. There is no other way to put it. Maybe Iran owning up to this at least gives some closure to the families of his victims, rather than not knowing what happened and going through a drawn-out investigation that's more about politics than the lives lost. I'm curious to see what will happen following this admission, both politically and in terms of the impact on aviation in the country. If Iran had concluded to blame the faulty plane or human error, that there would have been some economic issues. However, Iran admitted doing it. Maybe our worthy opponents will take back the comments of their prime minister and recognize that Trump was not at fault here. I quote, "Some people hate the fact that I got along with the President Putin of Russia," he tweeted. They would rather go to war than see this. It's called Trump derangement syndrome, unquote. Worried you might have Trump derangement syndrome? Wondering where it came from? I'm here to help. Let's start with Trump derangement syndrome means. The Urban Dictionary offers up its handy definition. Trump derangement syndrome, TDS, is a mental condition in which a person has been driven effectively insane due to the dislike of Trump, to the point at which they will abandon logic and all reason. You must vote against TDS and put out that Iran did in fact shoot down, the Ukrainian airliners. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Finally, we'll be moving on to our ethical speeches.
Sorry about that. I was struggling with technology. The downing of Ukraine's passenger jet was a tragedy that we all can agree should have never happened. However, this calamity would have been prevented with more understanding and political awareness from Donald Trump. Trump was ignorant of the outcomes of his decisions. Rather, he was forced on making the US military seem fierce, and as a result, the lives of many were lost. Relations between the US and Iran weren't great in previous years, but after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, they were escalated to an unprecedented degree. To put things in perspective, the Iranian government and people had just lost one of their most praised military generals. With tensions high and Iran on high alert, Iran unintentionally shot down the Ukrainian passenger jet. This string of events can be traced back to the assassination of Soleimani, which was led by Trump and the US government. Trump advocated for his decision by claiming it would prevent future tragedies. However, the event following this refute, the downing of the Ukraine plane and the bombings of the US bases in Iraq, was what I'm regarding to. In both events, there were completely unnecessary casualties. Trump's judgment were completely ignorant to others' lives, and as a result, many died. The lives of 176 innocent civilians, 56 of which were Canadian, were lost. Now, even after a month has passed, the people of Iran are fearful of another attack by US and even a world war. The Iranian government may not be completely innocent, but the civilians are, and bringing even more fear into their lives is ethically wrong. Even after the downing of the Ukrainian plane was reported and the attacks at the US base in Iraq, Trump continued to tweet about US pride. His lack of professional acknowledgement of all the lives lost displays how little he actually cared about the consequences of his decisions and the lives lost in the downing of the plane. Thank you.
Okay. If everybody is ready.
You can now move on to your ethical arguments.
Thank you. Now, ethically, the truth is simple. The truth is that the truth is nothing more or nothing less. Now let us look into the truth of this situation. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has defended the country's armed forces after it admitted shooting down a passenger plane by mistake. He said the Revolutionary Guard, the elite unit responsible for the disaster, maintained the security of Iran. Widespread protests and criticism from abroad have put growing pressure on Iran over its handling of the incident. But the Ayatollah told the rally support as he led Friday prayers in Tehran for the first time since 2012. And he told his people that he criticized the evil administration of U.S. President Donald Trump, whom he called a clown, accusing Washington of lying when it expressed support for the Iranian people, and said the U.S. would stab them with their poison dagger. He said that the Iranian missile strikes in Iraq were a slap in the face to the U.S. He described Iran's elite Quds force with the U.S. as a designated terrorist organization. It is a humanitarian organization with human values. He called Soleimani's funeral in the Iranian military response a turning point in history, and lambasted the evil British government along with Germany and France for triggering the formal dispute mechanism over 2015 nuclear deal. This support for his policies are falling on deaf ears among the young Iran, especially when he tries to tie his mistakes to the U.S. or Donald Trump. Trump may be many things, you may like him or you may not, but he did not make this mistake to say that the plane ascending from takeoff at the Tehran airport would be mistaken for a cruise missile descending into the airport area and could not have made by professionally trained, a mistake that could not have been made by professionally trained people. The Ukraine International Airlines Boeing 737-800 was traveling to Kiev from Tehran on the 8th of January when it crashed shortly after takeoff. The Ayatollah told the National Unity that Iran's enemies, a reference to Washington and his allies, had used the shooting down of the plane to overshadow the killing of senior Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in the U.S. drone strike. The Iranian authorities initially denied responsibility, but after international pressure mounted, the Revolutionary Guard admitted that the plane had been mistaken for a cruise missile during heightened tensions with the U.S.-Iran. Iran's admission in January 11 sparked backlash from Iranian athletes, actors, and other popular figures, as well as anti-governmental demonstrations by thousands of Iranian citizens. Protesters demanded widespread reforms throughout the government to increase transparency and honesty. To blame President Trump for the shooting down of a passenger jet taking off from your country is really masking the problem that the Iranian leadership is losing their hearts and minds of their fellow countrymen. Ayatollah Khamenei is at fault. His people did this and brought terror to much of the Middle East. Now his people are about to wake up and realize that their nightmare is just about over. To blame President Trump for this is illogical and unethical. That is all.
Thank you. We'll now be moving on to our rebuttal period, which will last approximately 20 minutes, 25-ish. Did we start? You guys can start if you'd like.
Okay. We would like to ask how you can hold Donald Trump responsible when Iranian authorities themselves admitted to causing the strike.
Oh, I'm mute.
Okay. Hi. So in one of your speeches, you had already stated if the U.S. did not escalate tensions, then the plane wouldn't have been shot down. That was already in one of your speeches, so you had technically admitted to that. And it was already said that Donald Trump had created a more hostile environment, which caused the human error to occur.
As per his tweets.
Yes, as per his tweets. How can that correlation does not equal causation in this instance? That while, yes, we did agree that it did contribute to the escalation, the tensions, whether or not were there, that did not mean that they did not take responsibility. So how can you blame Donald Trump when there is no blame on him?
The blame is more in the hands of the escalated tensions, which is a direct result of Trump's goading on of the conflicts that he himself started, which is why Trump is to blame from a moral standpoint.
They admit to their mistakes because they are the ones who shot it, but if it wasn't from the escalations, it would have never been shot.
And that was stated once again by you guys.
Read what you say. Read what you say. Read it, please.
Okay.
1 second.
The U.S. government shouldn't be blamed directly or indirectly for the accident. At the same time, I think it is fairly likely that if the U.S. hadn't escalated the situation, there would not have happened. However, that's not to say that the U.S. is at fault in any way, because there is cause and effect relationship is not there. This revelation follows Iran claiming that the plane had a technical fault immediately following the crash in spite of no evidence pointing in that direction. We've seen international intelligence agencies suggest that the plane was shot down. The video footage has even surfaced of the alleged incident. This was caused by some airlines and already trying to cancel flights to Iran. It is absolutely terrible and heartbreaking tragedy. There is no other way to put it. So if these flights were already being shot down, then there is no escalation of Trump to blame because it was not that to blame.
So like you mentioned earlier, yes, correlation does not equal causation, but I feel like in this instance, it's very, very likely, like you stated by yourself, that the increased escalations and as a result of that, the plane being shot down was a direct result of Trump's actions. Now, for example, I brought his tweets earlier, right? On May 19th of 2019, so before the incident occurred, Trump said, if Iran wants to fight, that will be the official end of Iran. Never threaten the United States again. So how can it be argued that Trump's actions did not increase the alertness of the Iranian military, and as a result had them on their toes and brought them to a boiling point, which led to the shooting down of the 752 airline?
Okay, cool.
Okay, thank you. Now, if the tensions with the U.S. and Iran are that high, that may have been a correlation. However, the causation of the actual plane being shot down, it was their own plane in their own place. So how can you say that it was Donald Trump's fault when tensions of the may not have caused it? It can't have caused it, can it?
United States military had recently airstrike the Iran just before this incident and killed their general. It's very, very justified that Iran was on high alert. And when an incoming potentially hostile flight entered their airspace, it's almost, it's not justified at all, but it's a understandable action that they committed. But once again, it was a result of Donald Trump first striking the Iranian planes.
That general was killed in Iraq, not Iran. Further, how could they mistake a passenger jet for a cruise missile? You can't attribute this to Donald Trump more so than it is professional error on the Iranian government's part, which is Iranian government's fault.
You are correct, it did happen in Iraq, my apologies, but the fact still stands that it was an Iranian military general. Therefore, the United States had threatened and targeted Iranians, which is why Iran was on high alert. So where the airstrike happened was almost unimportant when it comes to the bigger picture here, which is that the United States had threatened Iran on multiple occasions far before this incident, which caused Iran to be on high alert.
So in part with our statements, you do agree that Iran's government is unstable and unstable, correct? As you never offered any insight on that, you do agree with that statement, correct?
Please elaborate further on what you mean by unstable.
We mean unstable in that we have, in our speeches, multiple times cited that there are unstable governments, there is protest, and thus definition unstable, which you never argued. So you agree with that statement, correct?
While it might be true that they have their own political issues going on and they have their own sense of uncertainty with their government, it doesn't necessarily justify Trump taking such severe action to the degree that he is striking down their major military figures and so forth.
So if the uncertainty is in their government, then could that not be attributed to a cause of the missile striking down, the supposed strike?
But I mean, in a sense, I feel like it's kind of a scenario where a bully is attacking a victim constantly, and suddenly this victim is known to, like, knowing that the bully is going to come over and then they're going to do something again. And so when the bully is in the vicinity of the victim kind of instinctively tries to avoid it. They expect this to happen again. So in this circumstance, it's almost like Iran was expecting something from the US and they kind of instinctively acted upon it.
But if they did this instinctual act, as you so put it, against a bully, by the way, who does not represent more than his tweets, because most of his tweets are unprecedented. If you really are this instinctual action, it is an action taken by the government, and any governmental action cannot be anyone's to blame besides that government. Is that not correct?
But bear in mind, the government is working in the best interest of its own people and its own country, in a sense. So if Trump has been consistently attacking their people, being the general, then obviously they're in a situation where they're feeling very prone to being attacked again. So they're going to instinctively defend themselves like any government traditionally would try to do.
On top of that, they're fair to assume something was going to happen due to Trump telling them that the U.S. will retaliate. So they were fair to be on their feet and to have that fight or flight response when it comes to defending themselves.
And also consider, for example, with the tragic events of 9/11, after that occurred, the entire U.S. was on really high alert. They were making their borders security more intense and so forth. And it just kind of goes to show that after one attack, you expect more to come through, and you are kind of preparing yourself for even further harm potentially.
At the same time, you argued that yes, the government did, authorize the strike on the airplane, and you argued that it's the fault of the government. But when you look at it, what is the government? The government is a collection of people, legislation, everything along those lines, but it's people at its core. And people at their core have a fight or flight response when it comes to potential dangers, right? And when, such a huge military power like the United States is telling them that, that's going to be the end of Iran, never threaten the United States again, then how can they not, as humans, have that fight or flight response to want to defend themselves for any potential threats that may be coming their way?
However, if it is an illegitimate government, an unstable government, as you so agreed earlier, then they are not a body of these people. And yes, while they may be human beings, they are still a body that overthrew their previous government and can make decisions on their own, regardless of instinctual action towards proposed threats that have not been substantialized. So how can you say it is anyone's fault when they have claimed fault?
Of course, but if you consider, if those tensions didn't exist in the first place, they wouldn't have any real reason to want to even strike down the plane. They wouldn't think anything of it, because if they never occurred in the first place, they wouldn't consider it a possible threat and they wouldn't have taken that course of action. And as stated previously, in the scenario where the government should be protecting its own people and ensuring the safety and integrity of its own country, they're going to act in the best name of their country. And in that situation where you're unsure at the time whether or not this could be a missile that could harm potentially thousands of people, you might take that course of action as fast as possible to try and prevent further harm.
And what if Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's own statements against the U.S., those were not met with immediate striking down of an airplane in 2002, 2005. So how can you say that this instinctual reaction of government is organic when the U.S. did not participate in the same pattern? It is not an organic reaction. It is a reaction of the Iranian government that they have taken responsibility for.
But also, the American government is known in the world to be one of the largest and most militarized governments that exist, really. And so when the kind of like biggest military force in the world is threatening a country, it's a little bit concerning for what could be considered a lesser military force. In America's position, most threats probably aren't taken as seriously because of how strong and reinforced their military is, and how historically speaking, they've always kind of come on top in terms of having higher military strength. So they don't tend to not take threats as severe, and obviously they are more prepared for these kinds of things. Whereas a country like Iran, which might have a military force that's to an extent lesser than the American force, they might be more cautious of this because, again, America is kind of like the top dog in the world in that sense.
In addition to that, I don't know if this is correct or not, so if I'm wrong, fact check me. But in that situation that you alluded to, that happened historically where the US was threatened, was the US first attacked by an airstrike just recently before that by the same country?
Well, it was near the time of 9/11, so.
When was the year that this occurred in?
I don't have the exact year, but it was near the time when we were experiencing many terrorist attacks and we were involved in wars overseas. There was no.
After the events of 9/11, they took the precautions necessary to protect their people, again, securing their borders and so forth. And of course, maybe they didn't shoot down a plane in this instance, but they might not have seen that as the same threat. And they still took instinctive precaution against this because with one precedented event occurring, they have to try to do something to prevent any further events from or issues from happening again in the future.
In addition to this, Iran has a right to be on edge and have those protective instincts, as it is proven that the United States has had a pattern of creating conflicts in territories of other nations, because back in the early 90s, a region of Croatia was with the majority of Serbian population experienced like the biggest ethnic cleansing, and the U.S. had actually orchestrated this. So it is understandable to see why Iran would take these precautions to ensure that the same thing wouldn't happen to their nation.
That is okay. That is an idea that Iran may have. However, that is a vast overreach compared to the fact that Iran had a missile launch that was not targeted towards Iran. It was in Iraq, for one. So while the location may be immaterial, it does have materiality in that because it was not a target of Iran in its place, it did not heighten attention to the levels that you assume would mean that U.S. would come in and do cultural cleansing like they did in Croatia in the 90s, supposedly.
We're not comparing the escalation of tensions. More so, we're comparing the United States historically seen and historically proven actions that lead to increased tensions overseas. So the United States is known for, according to this book and from what we've seen, to instead of diplomatically solving issues in foreign countries, to actually escalate tensions and conflicts instead, which is what we're arguing.
So the escalation of tensions is the argument you are making. The American escalation of tension had caused the shooting down of the plane.
Yes.
From the Iranian reaction. So the Iranian reaction due to the tensions. However, if it is an Iranian reaction and the tensions can only be attributed to Donald Trump's tweets, again, substantialized in their credence, how can you say that the tensions were a direct result of Donald Trump's tweets?
Pardon, can you please repeat that last part?
Donald Trump's tweets have not been taken seriously by many powers in this instance. So how can you say that he's taken seriously in the face of Iran in this?
One, North Korea has taken Donald Trump's tweets pretty seriously. That's what led to the summit. And Two, it's not only his tweets, but backed up by the airstrike on their top military general.
And also, even though that was kind of done in Iraq, it was done specifically to target that general because they knew he was in Iraq. So clearly the US had it out for Iran specifically. Even though the attack occurred in Iraq, it doesn't mean that they were attacking Iraqis, they were attacking the Iranian general more specifically. And that alone means that they have something out for Iran and means there's tension being created there.
With y'all talking about tweets and stuff like that, and the shooting was January 8th. On January 6th, Iran themselves posted a tweet talking about with the coffin and the flag, saying that they would do something to Trump, that they would do something to America. And if you say that tweets are enough to make somebody shoot down a passenger plane, isn't it well within our right to tweet back at them and argue?
It's not necessarily the tweets itself that are like the main reason why this happened, but more so the tweets acting as a support for why the tension's being built up. The main tension occurred, like the biggest form of tension sparked when the general was killed, and that's like a direct action. The tweets kind of support this line of action in a sense. It's like a backing up what you're doing basically.
Also, 2 days before that tweet, on the 4th of January 2020, Donald Trump sent out a threat targeting 52 Iranian sites, which includes cultural sites, which is a war crime. So, yeah, that's all I have to say.
I'm sorry, we didn't hear you. Could you repeat that?
Okay, she'll be repeating it.
Thank you.
Sorry. 2 days before that tweet you just mentioned that Iran sent out, Donald Trump actually sent out a threat which said that he has targeted 52 Iranian sites. Sorry. And some of which were cultural sites, and those are war crimes. And so the point made.
Was why Iran took such protective measures.
Oh yes, the point made was about how it could be a direct like cause and like taking threats seriously. And so
it could be understood as to why Iran took such protective measures to ensure that their cultural sites and the people living, inhabiting that area were not going to be hurt.
And their response after 2 days kind of represents how they took his threats seriously and why they responded the way they did.
And does you bringing up Iran's tweet not further prove that these tweets have contributed to the escalation of conflict? So while yes, you can argue that Iran technically contributed to it as well due to the tweeting, the fact of the matter is that the United States did not do much in the ways of solving it diplomatically.
So in essence, you blame Donald Trump because he did not handle the situation diplomatically.
Well, it's more so a fact that because this constant aggression and like tense situation that's being created, this is kind of a direct reason for why they might have struck down the plane. That's kind of what we're trying to get at.
Just a heads up, we have somehow gotten to our 5-minute warning already. Just a heads up. Yeah, it's almost 4 here.
Muted.
You're muted, I think.
Sorry. Again, we'll bring in the diplomatic in handling it in a sensitive or tactical way. How is it tactical to shoot down a passenger plane that got mistaken for a missile somehow, even though it was ascending, excuse me. Further, crossed by the fact that on January 11th, Iran admitted to shooting down the Ukrainian airplane with their missiles. Anti-governmental protests took to the streets in Iran on Saturday after the Tehran admitted that it had shot down this plane, killing 176 people. And their anger was fueled in large part by the nation's armed forces claiming that it had targeted the passenger plane unintentionally. It attributed to the crash on the radar activity and fear of U.S. action. Now, the Islamic Republic of Iran deeply regrets the disastrous mistake. My thoughts and prayers go to the mourning family, says President Hassan Rouhani said.
The aircraft came close to the sensitive IRGC military center at the altitude and flight condition that resembled hostile targeting. Under these circumstances, the aircraft was unintentionally hit and was unfortunately resulted in the death of many Iranian and foreign nationals. The statement further reads, now the victims include 82 Iranians, 63 Canadians, 11 Ukrainians, 10 Swedes, and 4 Afghans, 3 Germans, and 3 British nationals. Human error at the time of crisis caused by U.S. adventurism led to disaster, says Iranian Foreign Minister Javid Zarif. He tweeted this. Now, Iran has admitted publicly that military unintentionally shot down the Ukrainian jetliner, accumulating the lack of intense back and forth between U.S. and Iran and the two nations' volley threats and accusations at one another. This statement came Saturday morning and blamed human error for the shoot down on Wednesday that killed 176 people. The jetliner Boeing 737 operated at Ukraine international airports and went down in the outskirts of Tehran during takeoff just hours after Iran handled the barrage of missiles and U.S. forces in Iraq. This plane shot down the missiles that were located at the airport. Therefore, they could tell the difference between a plane taking off and a plane landing. The military statement carried by Iranian state media said that the plane was mistaken for a hostile target and it turned down a sensitive military center of the Revolutionary Guard. The military was at its highest level of readiness, and it said amid heightened tensions with the United States. However, in such condition, because of human error and it is unintentional way the flight was hit, the statement said. It apologized for the disaster and it would upgrade its system to prevent future tragedies. It also said that those responsible for the strike on the plane would be prosecuted. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky said in a statement Saturday that the Ukraine expected the Iran assurances on a full and open investigation, bringing the perpetrators to justice. He added the Ukraine expected the paying of compensation and official apologies through diplomatic channels. He also expressed hope for the continuation of crash intervention without delay. A team of Ukrainian investigators is in Iran. Ukraine and Iran and the U.S. all know that Iran did this. Maybe it's about time to tell the political leadership and to tell the truth, to not blame Trump, to blame Iran for something that they have in themselves taken credit for. An Iran plane downing, likely a violation of international humanitarian law, but not a war crime, as so was stated by yourself, your own team in that tweet.
Hey, that was a lot to digest. Just to clarify a little bit, you are comparing a situation in 2011 to when another Ukrainian plane was shot down by the Iranian military to the incident that happened on January 8th of this year, correct?
No.
Would you be able to summarize what you just said?
You said a lot.
Okay, so basically, because they took credit for the accident, because they are holding trials for the people who are responsible for the accident, how can you say that Donald Trump is responsible when Iran themselves has said that we are responsible and we are holding trials for compensation for this disaster? Because we accept, and the president of Ukraine has accepted that. So how can you say that Donald Trump is responsible when the Ukraine has accepted that Iran is responsible and that they're holding trials for this and that it is not a war crime? It is a humanitarian crisis claimed by Iran.
Okay, so while it's true that the Iran is holding trials for those responsible for the shooting, that's because, yes, they are responsible for the human error aspect of it, and that was mistaking an airplane for a missile. Now, when it comes down to why that human error could have been made in the first place, and why it could have been mistaken for a missile in the first place, is because of heightened tensions and the result of the U.S. threatening Iran.
But a missile's coming in, not up, and it was ascending from the airport, was it not?
To the military. Just say that. Sorry.
The thing is, the reason why they viewed it as a threat, like I understand it was ascending, but the reason why they viewed it as a threat was because it was flying in close proximity. And an assumption can be made that they wanted to deal with the issue before it could have escalated further and gotten closer to the site.
However, when it takes off from an Iranian airport, and it was not flying before that, it was taking off, how can you say that it was being launched anywhere else, being launched from anywhere else when it was in fact ascending away from the airport. It cannot have been mistaken when it came from their own governmental institution. Isn't that correct? Apologies.
That shoots down the whole Trump problem.
To confirm, are you guys trying to say that Iran intentionally shot down the plane?
We are saying that the human error does not, that human error cannot be blamed on Trump when the human error is slightly ridiculous in the aspect of an ascending plane being mistaken for a descending missile.
And the missile and the plane are even the same size.
Further, they're not even the same size. So how can you blame Trump for something that is a slightly ridiculous human error?
Just to clarify, we're not blaming the human error on Trump at all. The human error is completely in the fault of Iran. Our argument is the cause of the human error. And the cause of the human error and why they made that mistake in the first place, or what brought them to have some sort of anxiety when it came to incoming objects flying close to their military space, was because of the escalation. So it's not the human error blaming on Trump, but we're saying that Trump is the reason why the human error happened in the first place.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's 4:05 p.m. over here, so we do have to move on to conclusions.
Okay.
That okay? Okay. Would you guys like to begin?
No, you can begin.
Okay. Okay. So to conclude, the crash of Flight 752 was a direct result of the actions of the U.S. government. Morally speaking, Donald Trump's ordered killing of Qasem Soleimani was not the right call. To save lives by taking them is a morally backwards way of thinking. If Donald Trump had opted to resolve matters diplomatically, any further death could have been avoided, such as the crash of Flight 752. Now, from an economical standpoint, the U.S. has been increasing tensions with Iran for a few years. Now, due to the tightening of many sanctions, the tension between Iran and the U.S. was brought to a boiling point, and Donald Trump's ordered airstrike was the last straw. Now, finally, looking at it from an ethical standpoint, it was clearly a fault. The human error was clearly a fault of the anxiety that Donald Trump's actions, threats caused within the Iranian military, and that is why the human error happened in the first place. So once again, just to finally summarize, it was a result of Donald Trump's actions and his threats.
Okay. To conclude, we will say that the striking down of the airplane Flight 737-800 was not Donald Trump's direct fault, as you so claim, because the fact is his actions, his tweets are not taken seriously. In reference to your North Korean aspect, the North Korea summit was not due to the tweets. It was due to many other things. Further, the human error aspect of this means that it is taken responsibility for it by the Iranian government as human error. Trials have been held for them and has been recognized by Ukraine. To blame Donald Trump for the mistakes of Iran would be unethical, immoral, and would not be sound. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I think that officially concludes our debate. Thank you so much for connecting with us. This was a really good one, I think. We had a lot of fun. I'm sure you guys did too. And thank you again, Mike, for reaching out and,
Oh yeah, we wanted to try to. I sent to Clayton a couple of things. One's on the contravirus, and one is on coronavirus. I'm sorry, coronavirus, and the other one is on President Trump last week in his State of the Union address said that all schools should teach vocational and technical education to their students. And I thought that would be a good one to argue as well. But the coronavirus, if we're prepared or not, it's really impacting a lot of people around here. We've had a lot of scares with people coming back from China, a couple of our students, and not our students, but students at the university here, And I know in Toronto there, I imagine there's a lot of people might be worried about that as well.
There is, yeah. There's a lot of stigma, especially going around right now.
And I thought instead of arguing if it's good or bad, we could maybe argue about the preparations of what you can or cannot do on it. And since you guys are a science-oriented group of people, we thought we might could learn a lot from you guys on this.
That'd be an interesting way to look at it. Yeah, these sound like pretty good topics. We'll get back to you guys soon about them. We just have to go over with our groups and everything, and then they'll choose which one they like better.
Now, I did want to say something before you leave. Now, you're insinuating that United States is a bully, right?
Say it again, Tabby.
Well, we're just thinking in the context of working with our side of the debate. So
I know. I was just jigging you.
in that sense, yeah, I guess.
Well, what did y'all actually think about this debate? Like, not doing it anymore. What did y'all actually think?
Like the topic, like, do you think?
I think, yes, the U.S. is causing a lot of stress on Iran, maybe, but I think that's kind of an error that shouldn't have been made. I mean, I'm sure there's more preparations they could have taken, and they could have verified a lot. I mean, also with what you guys were saying, how it was ascending. I mean, things like that are kind of more clear, and there's definitely some window of time to consider whether or not it might be a missile. So I feel like it was more so their fault, and they were kind of making a really big mistake. But yeah.
I think I'm going to take a moral gray area here and say that, yes, while Trump escalated tensions, Iran is technically directly at fault for shooting down the plane. Well, at the same time, I don't think we're in positions where we can argue exactly what Iran's situation was. Because to be a country that has had escalated tensions with the US that could potentially lead to something a lot bigger, we don't know what type of fear or anxiety that they were going through and how quickly they believed they had to make a decision before their people were in danger. So that's my take on it.
What's your take?
Lorna?
Well, love how Trump keeps getting off on technicalities.
God.
Yeah, no, but I think that the escalation of tensions, that was actually a really good point that I liked. Definitely Trump caused some definite stress for them as a small country. We are a world power, so it is very scary when a world power knocks on your door and kind of threatens you like that. But again, the ascending airplane, I couldn't get over it. How do you mistake that for a missile? It was an airplane.
It's a little strange.
Yeah.
At the same time, you don't know what exactly they saw.
Yeah, and you had to launch the missiles almost the same time as right after they launched the plane left. So this decision was made very quickly, but it's something does not appear to be. We have the full facts. I think effectively, you can make a very good argument as if the Islamic Republic of Iran is really representing the will of the people there in Iran anymore. We've talked to people for the last 15, 16 years in Tehran, and most of the people we met have been very, very nice, very pro-Western, very interested in what's going on. And in fact, in many cases, they would know much more about our government than even some of my students. So yeah, I'm sorry. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.